Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, Iran launches a major retaliatory attack on Israel.
Multiple buildings have been destroyed as Israel's advanced air defenses were unable to block all missiles. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says it's using new methods in this latest wave.
Iran's leadership has shown it can strike back. And after the most intense escalation in years, Iran hasn't just fired missiles, it's reshaping the narrative. I'm Manuel Rapalo, and this is The Take.
I'm Nargis Bajoli. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and I am an anthropologist and a researcher of Iran, revolutions, and warfare.
Nargis, welcome to The Take. Let's start with the events of these past few days. How would you characterize where we are right now in this conflict?
Sure. So Iran was in the midst of going into the sixth round of nuclear talks with the United States that was supposed to be held in Oman over the past weekend. And a few days prior to those talks, Israel launched attacks inside of Iran, killing a number of the commanders of the military forces within Iran, as well as a number of nuclear scientists, attacking the nuclear facilities, as well as attacking certain military bases and military installations, and also attacking civilian infrastructure and civilian residential buildings. Some are calling it Iran's Pearl Harbor moment. In many ways, Iran was sort of caught off guard in this attack because they were in the midst of those nuclear negotiations with the United States. So it took Iran some time to sort of understand what was going on and then be able to respond. Began responding by lodging their missiles at Tel Aviv initially, and then military bases throughout different parts of Israel. And then in the next night started to also target Haifa because Israel had targeted some of Iran's oil facilities and economic infrastructure. And so Iran has said that it will retaliate in kind. What Israel targets, Iran will target in kind. In actuality, this is the biggest exchange of fire that we've seen between these two countries ever, actually, in history. There has been a shadow war that's been going on between Iran and Israel for many years now, but nothing to the scale that we've seen to date. And in many ways, from the Iranian leadership perspective, this is seen as an all-out war, and so they're responding in kind.
I wanted to ask you as well about this evacuation order that was given in Tehran, which, if you see the images on social media, these long lines of people trying to leave the Iranian capital. It seems like there's quite a bit of panic and confusion there as we speak still. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So when Israel first launched these attacks, Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, sent a video to essentially the Iranian nation saying that Israel was not going to be attacking civilians and it was going to be attacking just sort of military and regime personnel. But very clearly, very quickly, it became clear that that actually wasn't the case. And so the more residential buildings started to blow up across Iran, and especially in the major cities. I mean, I think it's important to note for everyone listening that almost all major cities in Iran are being targeted at the moment, some from the air, but there's a lot that's also happening, sabotage inside. It's been reported that they've been preparing for this for about 8 months. But from the scale of the attacks that are happening, it seems to be much longer than that. And again, I think it's also important in the broader context to put it in not just the shadow war between Iran and Israel, but that this has been something ongoing to really target and go for state collapse or regime change in Iran for upwards of 50 years. Almost every major neighborhood in Tehran has been targeted in one way or another. So folks have started to try to go to other provinces and other areas of the country. And that has caused a lot of panic and it's gridlock. I know of people who have been sitting in traffic for hours and at this point days and have decided to return to Tehran because they're just not getting anywhere.
No, the images certainly are very powerful, seeing those images of people trying to leave the Iranian capital right now. Let's keep the focus on Iran for a minute here, because this retaliatory attack from Iran against Israel was direct. This is a scenario that at this point has moved beyond rhetoric. You're describing this, you're characterizing this as a war already. What does this signal to you about Iran's military calculus and where the political will is focused right now in Iran?
So, what we know is that in the first days of the attacks, Iran was launching a lot of missiles, about 200-ish at Israel. And these are a lot of their older missiles. So they haven't started using their newer missiles quite yet. And I think that's important to note. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that they're testing out the air defense systems across the Middle East as the missiles fly towards Israel. And the other is that they are preparing for a much longer term war. And I think that that's important for everyone to understand here. And the reason for that is because of the scale and the scope of Israel's attack that happened last week. So from the perspective of the Iranian establishment, and then more broadly, the Iranian sort of nation, the way that this is being understood is that this is an attempt by Israel and then perhaps the United States to cause state collapse. So this goes beyond regime change. I mean, regime change is one thing that seems to be on the table. But the other thing, and I think what folks within Iran, especially the establishment, are sort of coming to terms with, is that this is about, similar to what happened in Libya, similar to what happened in Syria over time, that this is one of the phases of causing complete societal and state collapse within the country. So yesterday you had attacks on the foreign ministry in Iran. You've had attacks on almost many of the major ministries within Tehran itself, in addition to all of the other residential spaces that are being hit and civilian infrastructure. You've had attacks on hospitals that have been happening over the past few days as well. So putting all of those pieces together, it is a indication to Iran that Israel is attempting to become the hegemon of the region militarily, and as Benjamin Netanyahu says, to remake the Middle East. So according to Israelis' sort of understanding of what's been happening in the region, in their own words, Iran is the head of, as they call it, the octopus. And so now they're going in to completely collapse Iran. And so this is why then you're seeing the types of attacks from the Iranian end on Israel, because in many ways, this is a war for survival.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the impact that this could have on the region, because there's over the weekend, we also heard from an Iranian lawmaker who said that Iran is considering closing the Strait of Hormuz. This is a very narrow waterway. It's the only entryway into the Persian Gulf. About 20% of global oil consumption goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So how serious is this threat? And what would be the implications of this if it happened?
I mean, it's a serious threat. It's one of those things that Iran always sort of puts out there as leverage to say, don't attack or else we'll close the Strait of Hormuz. So now it remains to be seen whether they will go through with that or not, and if and when they choose to go through with that. One of the things that they know is that if they do that, then this very quickly becomes a much broader crisis. It's not just between Iran and Israel at that point. It becomes something that is impacting the global community. So one of the things that Iran is also attempting to do, because for 50 years, Iran and especially the Islamic Republic have been the epitome, the archetype of the crazed Muslim terrorists. That entire archetype of crazed Muslim terrorists started with the 1979 revolution in Iran, and the media narrative around that grew in the 1980s. And it was specifically about Shia Muslims all throughout the 1980s, and it then expanded to be about Palestinians and Sunni Muslims with the Palestinian Intifada in 1987. So this entire sort of thing that we have that went on steroids in the post 9/11 environment of these fanatical, crazy Muslims that are terrorists everywhere and always, Iran is sort of in many ways the ground zero of that. So Iran understands that it is up against that kind of narrative in the media and public realm. it cannot from the get-go close the Strait of Hormuz, or it cannot from the get-go sort of do things that play into that kind of narrative. And so what it is attempting to do by doing the types of strikes that it does, but at the same time, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is working very hard as well, and basically saying, we are retaliating because we were struck unprovoked, but we will stop striking as long as there is a road to peace on this, is that they are attempting, and I don't know whether they will succeed at this or not, because I think that kind of framework and that archetype is so strong, but they're attempting to not fall into that. And so the threat of the Strait of Hormuz is one of those things that if we see Iran doing that, then it means that it really sees the entire operation that's happening as an existential threat.
More with Nargis after the break. Before we talk about how this moment could actually be changing that narrative, I do have one more question regarding the timing of all of this right now, because the strikes against Iran, which were unprovoked by Israel, came just before this sort of final round of nuclear talks that were supposed to be taking place between Iran and the United States in Oman. Talks that the Iranians said could have resulted in a deal. Now those talks are off. So, and Tehran is accusing Israel of undermining the diplomatic process here. What can you tell us about the timing of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu in particular and the Israeli right have tried in earnest for the past 30 years almost to make sure that there is no kind of rapprochement between Iran and the West, and in particular Iran and the United States. So when Obama signed the JCPOA with his Iranian counterparts, Benjamin Netanyahu came to the United States and gave an address to Congress, basically saying that this was a horrible deal that needed to be undone, and did not meet with the president. Then they worked very hard to undo that deal, which Trump did. He pulled out of it in his first presidency. So again, and Netanyahu in particular himself has been saying since at least 1992 that Iran is anywhere from 3 years to 5 years, and then as the years go on, it gets to months away from a nuclear bomb. This rhetoric and this kind of framing of what is happening in Iran from the Israeli perspective has been something that is ongoing for decades now. So the timing of this, again, now whether the negotiations were a ruse or not, so the Wall Street Journal and some others are reporting that this may not have been sincere negotiations. We don't know that kind of information quite yet, and we sort of have to wait into the future to see what happened, to see what kind of information we can get. But at least from the Iranian end and from what the Trump himself and his negotiator Witkoff were saying publicly, they were attempting to come to some sort of deal. And days before, they were going to go into their 6th round of communication and negotiations, Israel launches this unprovoked attack. Again, it's an attempt to not have any kind of normalization happen with Iran and the wider region, and in particular with the United States.
So, Nargis, help us understand how the political messaging here is helping to shape the public's understanding of what's happening and what's going to happen next.
Yeah. So I think we have to break this down in a few different ways. I think what is happening on mainstream Western media is one thing, and we need to talk about that. And then what's happening sort of in the public realm outside of the mainstream press is something else entirely. So let's break it down first. On the mainstream media level, especially from the West, the narrative has been that these were preemptive strikes by Israel to preempt Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. That is the line in the mainstream press, and that line is continuing. And I think no matter what Iran says or Iranians on the ground kind of show through what's happening on their streets, that line is going to be very difficult to shift in a mainstream Western media sense. However, because we have been watching 20 months of live stream genocide on our phones all around the world, and because we've also seen in these 20 months, Israel, engaging in warfare in Lebanon and then taking over territory in Syria, you are now also seeing a very different reaction from the general public in the United States in particular, as well as other parts of the world. So prior to 20 months ago, in the US, there was a lot of loyalty to Israel. And I think if this kind of confrontation between Iran and Israel had happened prior to what happened in Gaza, we would be having a very different kind of conversation. And the political mood around the world would be very different than it is today. Today, you have Israel putting things out officially online as well as in the press. You have, all of this kind of media messaging happening in the West, even in conservative places like the New York Post and all of those spaces. And then when you look at the commentary from normal Americans to normal people all around the world, the reaction is quite different. So this is telling me two things. Israel and the West remain one and the same on a political level in what is going on in the Middle East. On a popular level, you are seeing a lot of diversion from that. And I think what's really important here is that the MAGA base, so the base that voted Trump into power, because Trump said that he is against wars. He did not want to start another forever war in the Middle East. You are now seeing a huge break in the MAGA movement with Trump on this issue. And it's not just these past few days. This has been a break that has been happening since January on this issue.
I do have one more question for you, Nargis, and this is more of a question of how this is all playing out internally in Iran, because Iran is dealing with a real loss here. We're talking about dozens of high-ranking military officials, high-ranking scientists that have been killed, including the IRGC intelligence chief. There have been more than 220 people killed in Iran. How is this being processed by the public?
So initially you had, again, because of the messaging, not just from Netanyahu himself, but you also have a whole slew of satellite stations that are broadcast into Iran, news stations and others in Persian that people watch quite often. And because there is a lot of anger towards the ruling establishment in Iran, there was a lot of messaging from these satellite stations, and particular ones that are aligned with Israel, that said things to the effect of, don't worry, this is not against the people, this is against the regime, and then we're going to free you. The sort of liberatory, we're going to bring you liberation based on bombs, similar to what happened with Iraq and the lead up to that invasion in 2003. So you had initially quite a number of, especially urban Iranians, saying, okay, they're just going to target the regime officials, and then maybe this is going to be something that we can work past. At this stage, with it now having gone into its third day and into its fourth day, what you're seeing is very much a rally around the flag kind of moment within Iran itself. Now, the Islamic Republic, the ruling establishment, has not only a lot to answer to after all of this is done, if they survive it, but also they have a lot to sort of get their heads around, because I think also another thing that is not being talked about as much outside of Iran is that a lot of these bombs are actually happening from drones within the country, through sabotages, through sort of cells that have been established inside of the country, many of whom are Iranians themselves. So this is something that now there is a lot of conversation around, because there's so much damage that is happening, that you are now seeing that initial of, okay, we don't like the Islamic Republic, maybe this is our way to get out of them. That is being sort of very quickly wiped away. And with the realization that this is full-on war, and we need to be able to deal with this, because again, it's about civilians, and Iran was not prepared for a war. Iran hasn't had a war in 40 years. So there are no shelters for people to run to. There was no idea that this was going to be happening. And so there was no prep for it. You have a civilian population in essence that has been completely shell-shocked by all of this. So it's coming to terms with this shock. And that means that it's going to happen both at the societal level and at the political level. But Iran and Iranians first of all, a very nationalistic society. But second of all, they see this as an affront to the nation at this point, not even just the Islamic Republic anymore, especially because the United States is coming behind it. So there's a much broader, Iran's history did not just start in 1979.
And there's a lot more nuance into this as well that is often missed.
Yes, Iran's history is about, especially over the past 100 years, about gaining independence and sovereignty from greater powers. This plays into that kind of longer history. And it doesn't matter what kind of political leaders are at the helm, because this is about gaining independence and sovereignty, and they see what is happening as an encroachment on that.
Nargis, thank you so much for joining us today on The Take.
Thanks for having me.
And that's The Take. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to give it a like so more people can find this episode. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what stood out to you, or if there's anything you'd like us to dive deeper into next time. I'm always checking in, so let's keep the conversation going. See you tomorrow.